Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In today's video, I'm going to share some Color Shift Christmas cards with Shimmer. I've shared here how much I love the new Color Shift pads as much as I love my interference pads, and there's a few new Christmas things from Lisa Horton Crafts. So the first thing is a stamp and die set called Happy Christmas Panel Pairs. Now there was a mess up in that stamp set and there's an extra R with the Merry. So we're going to do some stamp surgery before we actually use that stamp. Then we also have the Beaded Diamonds layering stencil and then the coordinating Beaded Diamonds embossing folder. So anytime I get a brand new acrylic stamp set, I use a white eraser to remove any possible manufacturing residue from the stamping surface. So I'm going to do that first before I do any stamp surgery. I just have a plain white eraser here, just rubbing it on that surface and then using a soft brush to remove any eraser bits. It just helps to prep the stamp for taking ink later. Then we're going to pull off that Very Merry Christmas set and we're going to remove one of these R's. So I'm just using my detail scissors from Spellbinders and I'm just cutting between the lines up until that second R, and then I'm going to go against or around the profile of that R so that I have something to butt the next one up to it. So I have cut off the R and the Y and now I'm cutting that R off of there. So we should have pretty much the same curve or the same profile beside that Y because I cut right against the shaped part of the R, if that makes any sense. And I want to make sure it fits in there nicely. There's a little bit of extra acrylic where I cut between the different lines. So before I start to use it, I just keep on adjusting that and make sure that I like the final result. Now this error was noticed after the stamp set was released, and rather than having these sets go to waste, she reduced the price of them on her site so that you can still enjoy them. This set will still work. This stamp surgery, you could see it just took me a few moments and the stamp works perfectly. You'll see in just a moment when I'm doing the stamping. The die set that coordinates it, obviously you'd have to do a little bit of fussy cutting because we cut out that extra R. Another option is just to leave that R right in there and really see if anyone notices, because quite frankly, I had to read the stamp 3 times before I actually noticed what was wrong with it. I knew there was something from what someone had said, but I didn't know what it was until I had read it the 3rd time. So people might not actually notice. It'd be fun to do it and just see how many people actually notice it. So like I said at the beginning of the video, I'm going to do some Color Shift inks with these. So I started with the Golden Heather Color Shift ink pad. I want to do the purple color on the bottom of my letters, and then I'm going to do Fruit Punch at the top. I'm doing some non-traditional colors because these Color Shift pads come in a limited color selection. There's not really any traditional Christmas colors, and sometimes I like to have fun with non-traditional colors. So we're going to do pink and purple with some green for these Christmas cards. So to do the purple, I put the ink on there, and I was trying to put the ink on there so they were just at the bottom of the letters. I ended up finding it worked a lot easier to just ink that whole stamp, use a damp microfiber cloth to rub the ink off of the areas that I didn't want it in, and then stamp with it. So I did that a couple times for the purple, which was the Golden Heather, and now I'm doing it a couple times with the Fruit Punch, which is the pink tone. Now, I'm just getting a little bit of an ombre look by doing it this way. You could easily do it completely solid if you want. I just think that it looks just a little bit more interesting this way. My card, I plan on it being really, really simple. So I thought by doing this, it just added a little bit of extra detail to the card, but it doesn't really take a whole lot of time. And I stamped each part multiple times until I got the look that I wanted. Now, because Color Shift pads are like the blending inks, they stay wet a little bit longer. They're good for embossing. So I took some clear embossing powder so we can still see the colored ink underneath that embossing, and I'm melting that powder. Now, when I did this, it didn't have a complete coverage over the stamp. So I am going to go back in and I'm going to stamp it with some Versamark ink so we're not adding any color to it. We're just adding the sticky ink to it. And I'm going to do a second layer of that embossing powder. Because I already have that stamp set in the Misti and I haven't moved it, and I always put my cardstock in the bottom left corner, I know that when I stamp it, it's going to be in the exact same spot. So I stamp it a couple times just to make sure that I have some good coverage with that ink, and I go back in with that clear embossing powder and repeat that process. And if you wanted it any thicker than this, you could do this step over again as many times as you want, really. I mean, there is a point where it gets to be a little bit too thick, but I wanted to have some nice glossy letters. I plan on doing a little bit of ink blending on the background, and this glossy embossing powder is going to resist that ink, and we're still going to get the nice vibrant color from those color shift pads. So I'm using some Hickory Smoke Distress ink. I often like to use either black soot or Hickory Smoke Distress ink with my interference pads as well as my color shift pads. If you haven't heard of the interference and the color shift pads before, there's like 2 pads in one. It shows up one color on white or light cardstock, different color on black or dark cardstock. I do find that with Hickory Smoke, because it's not completely black, you get a little bit of both colors to it. You still see the shimmer from the pad, but you see the color that shows up on the light. And it's just a little bit more of a subtle look to it. And I went with that for this one because I wanted, or with these cards, because I wanted them to be a little bit more subtle. So after doing my first ink blending with that Hickory Smoke pad, I did trim my cardstock down to 3 3/4 inches by 4 inches. And then I did a little bit more ink blending around the edges just to kind of frame it in a little bit. You can tell that my ink blending is not completely even. I've mentioned it before, but I'll mention it again. I personally like it when there's some lighter areas and then some darker areas. If I wanted it completely even, I would just use solid cardstock. I think it looks a little bit more visually interesting if you're going to use ink to do some color variants or some shade variants there. For my mat, I have a piece of hammermill cardstock trimmed to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches, and I'm just using that Golden Heather color shift pad to ink around those edges so that I have a frame that matches the letters of my stamped sentiment. This makes it really, really easy for the mats because they have a perfect match to them. I find that with the color shift pads as well as the interference pads, because they're such unique pads with that shimmer to them, it's a little bit harder to find cardstock that matches perfectly. So by doing this, you know it's going to match perfectly because you're using the actual ink that you used with the stamping or with the stenciling or whatever you did with your image. For a little bit of an image focus here, I'm going to use this tree from the Nested Tree Frame die set. This is from a collection that Lisa did with Spellbinders last fall, and I wanted the tree to coordinate perfectly with my letters, so I'm doing a little bit of an ombre that looks the same as those letters, putting some of that Golden Heather at the bottom and then that Fruit Punch at the top. And these layer together, so we're going to see a little bit of each one of those colors. There's also some trim that goes on it that looks like snow, so that'll break up the different layers and kind of make them stand out a little bit more. There is also a star that you can put on top of the tree. I didn't die cut that one for this because I didn't want to introduce any more colors, but you could put that on there if you wanted. You could even put it on there and just have it as the white and have it very, very simple. Or it would also look great in silver to coordinate with the Hickory Smoke background of our card. So I'm gluing everything together with some Barely Art glue. It's just a nice liquid glue. I have it in a fine line bottle so I can use it for little pieces as well as for larger pieces for gluing my cards together. I like using a liquid glue because it gives you a little bit of wiggle room for moving things in place. That wiggle room is just handy to have so you can make sure everything is proper or everything is exactly how you want it to be. And with the liquid glue, I find it goes a really, really long way. To add just a touch more sparkle to my card, I'm adding a little bit of stickles to that white area, those snowy areas. And then I wanted my tree to look like it had ornaments on it. So I'm using some Silver Nouveau drops and just putting some dots on my ink blended areas. Again, just to look like it has ornaments on it. And this is where doing, say, a silver star on the top would look great because it would coordinate perfectly with the silver ornaments. And the Nouveau drops have some dimension to them, so they're going to not only be kind of circle ornaments on there, but they're going to also be popped up. So that is the first card, and you can see super, super simple. You could even, if you wanted, have your layers cut a little bit smaller and then have a little bit more white of the outside of the card or the card base showing so that it would coordinate a little bit more with the snow. Just personal preference. I chose to do it this way, but you could easily do those layers a little bit smaller if you wanted them to. For my second card, I'm using the Happy Christmas Wishes set. This one, or it's stamped, this is the other one in that Happy Christmas panel pairs stamp set. This one, everything is spelled correctly, so there's no stamp surgery needed for this one. I'm just doing some very simple stamping with this one with the Hickory Smoke pad. This way, when I stamp over it with the Summer Sky pad, we're going to see some of that green from the dye properties of the pad, but we're also going to see a little bit of the shimmer. And for that one, the shimmer is just a little bit blue. Now, the shimmer with the color shift pads is a little bit more subtle than they are with the interference pads. The interference pads are more transparent, and you see a lot more of the shimmer. There's just a little bit more. With the color shift pads, it's more of a creamy ink. It's more blendable. They're perfect for blending two colors together, which is why I was doing that with that first card. It still has the shimmer to it like the interference pads, but because of the creamier ink, the shimmer is just a little bit more subtle. So it's just not as obvious as the color shift pads. Now, each one of those pads have their place. I love the color shift pads for their blendability. There's not nearly as many colors as there are of the interference ones though. So it's just a matter of which suits what you like to do best. I love both of them and I use both of them often, but it just depends on the final result that I'm wanting. For the background of this card, I was going to do a stenciled colored background for this. I end up changing while I'm creating. I don't like all of the colors behind this sentiment. So I'll be using this background for my third card. I'm using the layering stencil, the Beaded Diamonds layering stencil set, and I have it on my Tacky Mat. I'm doing some stenciling on hammer mill cardstock. I'm starting with the fourth stencil. So this one is, I'm just doing it with the Hickory Smoke, just doing some ink blending over that whole background. Then I'm going to go in with the next stencil, which is just the tiny squares in the middle. And then I will be going in with some of my interference pads. So in order to line my stencils up, I put little bits of painter's tape on the top left corner as well as the bottom right corner. That way it makes it really, really easy to line up my stencils. These stencils have a little tab with holes in it on the left-hand side. Those are for if you have the Ultimate tool. They fit in perfectly with those little posts in the tool, and that way you don't have to line them up on your own. I don't have that tool, but this works perfectly for me. I love using the Tacky Mat and being able to stick my paper to it so I don't have to hold it down, and it makes it really, really easy just by putting the pieces of painter's tape on there, and it makes it really easy to line up the different layers. For the third stencil here, I'm using that Fruit Punch pad. So this one here, you can tell by the top of the lid of the pad, it has like a pinky coral color to it, but the color shift or the interference shimmer to it is like a golden color. So when you're looking at it, you see the pink, but when you tilt it in the light, you see a little bit more of that golden color. Now, the darker the cardstock we have, the less of that pink you're going to see, and you're going to see more of that shimmer. But I love the fact that with these, you have the opportunity to blend them together because of the creamier formula. So for this particular background, I'm not blending different colors together other than the fact that this particular layer goes over top of the last one, and the pieces that I did with that Fruit Punch are not covered. So I am putting some of the, this one is the Lilac Meadow. I am putting some of that Lilac Meadow over top of the Fruit Punch. I'm going to go back in with the stencil that I use because I want to brighten up that pink color a little bit more for my background. Same as when I'm doing my ink blending with my Distress inks, I am not completely solid, perfect, even stenciling here. There are some areas that are lighter. There are some areas that are darker. Again, to me, it just looks a little bit more visually interesting. But if you want them to be completely even, you absolutely can. You just want to be a little bit heavier in the areas where I'm lighter to do it, to make it nice and even. I would also suggest for, say, a background like this, using a larger stenciling brush. However, I have smaller ones because I like to ink blend on like die cuts and stuff like that. And I just find it a little bit easier and you have a little bit more control with smaller ones. You definitely want to have your own set of brushes for this, or that's what I like to do. I know there's some people that don't follow those rules, but I would rather be extra cautious with having separate brushes than contaminate my ink pads. It's much easier to me to have several brushes or many brushes than it is to have to replace ink pads because they got contaminated. So with my background, they're done. I can line it up in my embossing folder, run it through my die cutting machine to emboss those details in there, and it creates a really fun texture. And when I flipped it over, I just really liked the pattern of it. So I cleaned off my embossing folder. It took a white piece of hammer mill cardstock and embossed it. And this is what I ended up using as a background for this second card. Like I said, I didn't really, once I was done that background, it was just too busy with the sentiment that I didn't really like it. So I decided to just go with a plain embossed background. And I'm using white cardstock here. You could easily do a colored cardstock, or you could use one of the color shift pads to do just a solid color over a whole piece of cardstock and then do your ink blending. My mat here is some anchor cardstock. This is the same piece that I die cut the mat for the sentiment. You can see we got a hole right in there, but once I glue down this embossed piece, you're never going to know that hole is there. And this way I got more use out of that cardstock by using my mat piece to die cut the shadow for my sentiment. So I centered that in the middle of the card using that same Barely Art glue. I use it for pretty much everything. There's very few things that I don't use it for. I have some white pieces of cardstock here that I die cut with some holly and berries. This is from the Festive Ornament set. This is again from the collection that Lisa had with Spellbinders last fall. And these were intended to be used with the ornament dies in that set, but I thought they would make some nice, very simple embellishments to go around my sentiment. So that sentiment, because they're so large, it's quite a big focus of the card, and I didn't want to really do anything too much to take away from that. So I did a little bit of ink blending around my die cuts here with some of that Hickory Smoke Distress ink. Then I'm using the Fruit Punch Color Shift pad to color the berries and the Summer Sky pad to color my holly leaves. Now, by doing the hickory smoke on my leaves, I have an area that's a little bit darker. It looks a little bit shaded, as well as an area that's lighter. So it's going to coordinate with my sentiment because I already have the hickory smoke underneath my sentiment. So making that just a little bit darker. But because I also have the lighter part of the die cut on the tips, it's just going to put a pop of color in that card. They're going to coordinate with the sentiment, but also be just a little bit different because not all of that die cut has that hickory smoke on there. Once I have the leaves down, I put the berries in the center. Anytime I'm doing flowers or foliage, I like to use my fingers to curve the die cuts just to give them a little bit of a natural look to them. Obviously they're die cuts, they're paper. They're not going to look completely natural, but they just have a little bit of a more natural look to them because of the curve to them. For my third card, I'm going to use that colorful background that I created with the Beaded Diamond Layering Stencil, as well as the embossing folder with those color shift pads. I have a bunch of poinsettias here die cut out of the Year Round Blooms die set, and I want to keep the poinsettias white so they pop off the colorful background, but I do want them to have leaves that have some color to them. So I did a little bit of that Hickory Smoke Distress ink on one layer of each of those flowers. Then I did the Summer Sky, so we've got some green leaves here too. Green leaves for them. For the centers of the florals, I just did that hickory smoke. Typically I'll do gold in the middle or in the centers of poinsettias, but gold doesn't really fit with the colors that I'm using in the cards today, so silver is going to work, or gray in this case is going to work. Then I layer on the additional die cuts for my poinsettia before curving the center part and putting that inside my poinsettia. So even the layer with the leaves, I just use my fingers to curve them. Again, same as I was saying before with the holly, just to give them a little bit of natural dimension. It makes it look just a little bit more natural and just makes it look a little bit more interesting, in my opinion. I think the florals, if they're totally flat, I think they just look a little bit plain. I just like doing it. So once I have all of my die cuts together, I'm going to just let them sit for a few moments to let that glue dry. And then I'm going to add a little bit of sparkle to the center of them. So the poinsettia or the year-round bloom dies, there's 3 different flowers in there. One just looks best for a poinsettia, and there's 2 sizes for those flowers. So one of my flowers has a layer of the larger flower and then a layer of the smaller. The other 2 have 2 layers of the smaller. And I only did 2 layers for each of the flowers and then an extra layer for the leaves. If you want your flowers to be fuller, you can add extra layers to it. Because I'm doing white on white, I didn't think any additional layers were really that necessary. So with my mat and my background glued to my card, I just used my acrylic block on top just to hold everything nice and flat. And then I put my flowers on there till I have an arrangement that I like. I don't end up putting a sentiment on the front of this card because I don't have one from Lisa Horton Crafts that is small enough that I liked for it. All of the ones that I have are really quite big, but you could easily put a sentiment on the inside of the card. I just used some Stardust Stickles. It's just an iridescent glitter. So we're still going to see that hickory smoke distress ink on the center of those flowers, but it's just going to give them just a little bit of shimmer from that glitter. And then we also have the shimmer from the color shift pads on the background. And because that background is really quite busy, keeping the flowers themselves very simple just works with it. Then we have the second card here, which is the plain background, and then the Happy Christmas Wishes stamped sentiment, and then die cut, and then our shadow, and then the holly just framing that a little bit. And then our very first one where we use the 2 different colors to create an ombre sentiment. And again, this one you could make the background smaller by making the layers just a little bit smaller. And you can also embellish them in different ways as well. This is just, I chose to keep it very, very simple. Thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate all the time that you spend with me. I hope you have a fantastic day.